In the darkest hours of the 20th century, as Nazi Germany cast its shadow over Europe, one man stood resolute, refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed inevitable. Winston Churchill, with his unwavering resolve and fiery rhetoric, emerged as the indomitable leader who steered Britain through the storm of World War II. As German forces blitzed across Europe and France fell in 1940, Britain stood alone, a solitary bulwark against Hitler's tyranny. But in this moment of peril, Churchill's voice echoed across the airwaves, rallying a nation, igniting hope, and vowing that Britain would never surrender. His leadership was not merely about military strategy, it was about inspiring a weary nation to believe that victory was still possible when all seemed lost. Churchill's leadership was not born in comfort but forged in crisis. As bombs rained down on London during the Blitz, he walked the rubble-strewn streets, standing shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens. His words were a beacon of hope, and his conviction was contagious. But Churchill was more than just a symbol. His strategic decisions, such as resisting negotiations with Hitler and securing the support of the United States, laid the foundation for an Allied victory. Without his unyielding determination, the fate of Britain and perhaps the world might have taken a very different turn. Yet, what drove this man to stand firm while others faltered? What fueled his resilience when surrender seemed the logical choice? Today, we delve deep into the life of Winston Churchill, exploring the moments that shaped the man who would change the course of history. From his aristocratic upbringing and early military adventures to his rise, fall, and remarkable return to power, every chapter of Churchill's life adds a layer to his complex character. But what truly makes his story extraordinary is how his past, filled with triumphs and failures, prepared him for the greatest challenge of his life. As we embark on this journey through Churchill's world, we uncover not just the strategies of a wartime leader, but the soul of a man whose courage, vision, and unrelenting spirit saved a nation and inspired generations. The question lingers: what lessons can we learn from Churchill's extraordinary resilience and his refusal to accept defeat? Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, beneath the grandeur of Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, a birthplace that foreshadowed the weight of destiny that would rest on his shoulders. Blenheim, a gift from Queen Anne to Churchill's ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, stood as a monument to British glory, and young Winston's lineage carried the echoes of greatness. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a brilliant but tempestuous British statesman, whose meteoric rise and equally swift political decline left an indelible mark on Winston. Randolph was a fierce and often cold man, whose political ambitions overshadowed his relationship with his son. Though Winston idolized him, he rarely received the warmth and approval he so desperately craved. In contrast, his mother, Jenny Jerome, was a dazzling American socialite. Beautiful, charismatic, and far more invested in London's high society than in the upbringing of her son. Jenny's influence on Winston was profound but distant. She was a whirlwind of charm and elegance, but her emotional availability was fleeting. Winston would later describe her as someone who shined brightly, but was always just out of reach. This yearning for affection and recognition would follow him throughout his life, fueling his drive to prove himself, first to his parents and later to the world. Winston's childhood was far from the idyllic life one might imagine for a child born into privilege. Sent away to Harrow School at the tender age of 8, he endured a lonely and often harsh upbringing. The young boy, with his unmistakable lisp and unruly ginger hair, struggled to fit in. He was no academic prodigy. Math and Latin baffled him, but history stirred his imagination and writing offered a refuge where his mind could soar. At Harrow, Winston's rebellious spirit emerged early. He detested the rigid structure of the school, preferring to lose himself in tales of British heroes and military conquests. His academic performance was mediocre at best, often leaving his teachers frustrated. But beneath this seeming indifference lay a mind brimming with potential, one that would later craft speeches that stirred the hearts of millions. It was here, amidst the cold, unforgiving walls of Harrow, that Churchill began to develop his remarkable command of the English language, a gift that would one day rally a nation. Despite his academic struggles, Winston had one clear goal: the military. He resolved to follow in the footsteps of his ancestors, who had fought valiantly for Britain. After failing the entrance exams twice, he finally secured a place at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. But Churchill's journey was never meant to be easy. While his classmates breezed through their training, Winston poured his heart into excelling, determined to silence the doubts that had followed him since childhood. In 1895 he graduated and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, but for Churchill a desk job or routine military life was never enough. He thirsted for adventure, for the thrill of danger that tested a man's courage and will. Little did he know his yearning for excitement would lead him into life-or-death situations that would shape the leader he would become. Churchill's thirst for action took him far beyond Britain's borders. He was not content with simply serving in the military. He wanted to witness the world's chaos firsthand. As a war correspondent, he reported from the front lines in India and Sudan, crafting vivid, gripping accounts that blended fearless adventure with sharp political insight. His dispatches, filled with raw emotion and detailed observations, gained him widespread fame. But it was in South Africa during the Boer War in 1899 that Churchill's legend truly began. Captured by Boer forces during a reconnaissance mission, Churchill found himself imprisoned in a grim POW camp. But surrender was never in his vocabulary. In an act of sheer audacity and courage, he orchestrated a daring escape, traveling hundreds of miles across hostile territory with nothing but his wits and determination. When he finally reached safety, Churchill was hailed as a hero, and his reputation soared. Yet beneath the accolades he carried the scars of those perilous days, scars that steeled his resolve and prepared him for the monumental battles that lay ahead. Churchill's early life was a tapestry woven with ambition, struggle, and relentless pursuit of greatness. Each chapter, filled with challenges and triumphs, etched lessons into his soul, lessons that would one day guide him as he stood at the helm of a nation on the brink of collapse. Little did he know, every hardship, every moment of loneliness, and every daring escape was shaping the man who would one day rally an entire nation and defy the tide of tyranny. Winston Churchill's entry into the world of politics was anything but conventional. After his daring escapades as a war correspondent and his celebrated escape from a Boer prison, Churchill returned to England a national hero. But admiration alone was not enough to satisfy his restless spirit. He craved a stage where his ideas could shape the world, and Parliament was that stage. In 1900, at the age of 25, Churchill was elected as a Member of Parliament for Oldham under the Conservative banner. His entrance into politics was met with fanfare. But for Churchill, it was only the beginning of a long and tumultuous journey. As a young MP, he was ambitious, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. His speeches echoed with conviction, and his ability to articulate complex ideas captivated both colleagues and constituents. But beneath this rising star's success lay a restless mind, one that struggled with the rigid conservatism of his own party. By 1904, Churchill's dissatisfaction with conservative policies, especially on issues of free trade and social reform, became too great to ignore. In a bold and controversial move that stunned his peers, Churchill defected to the Liberal Party, a decision that would shape the trajectory of his career. This act of political rebellion was not without consequence. Many viewed him as a traitor, and doors that had once been open slammed shut. But Churchill, ever defiant, believed that principles mattered more than loyalty to a party. His decision to cross the floor was not just about politics. It was about staying true to his vision for a more progressive Britain. Churchill's gamble paid off. His eloquence and relentless drive quickly caught the attention of the Liberal leadership, and by 1908 he was appointed President of the Board of Trade. At just 33, he became the youngest member of the cabinet, and his passion for reform ignited a wave of change. Churchill championed groundbreaking labour reforms, introducing measures that improved working conditions and provided unemployment insurance. His empathy for the plight of the working class, born from his own feelings of abandonment as a child, fueled his commitment to social justice. But Churchill's meteoric rise did not stop there. In 1910, he was appointed Home Secretary, where he faced some of the most challenging moments of his career. It was during this period that he showed a complex blend of compassion and ruthlessness. While he implemented prison reforms and advocated for better treatment of inmates, his response to civil unrest was often harsh, earning him criticism. One particularly controversial incident was the siege of Sydney Street in 1911, where Churchill personally oversaw a standoff with anarchists that ended in bloodshed. His actions drew both praise and condemnation, highlighting the paradox of a man driven by both idealism and pragmatism. In 1911, Churchill took on a role that would forever intertwine his name with Britain's military fate, First Lord of the Admiralty. His fascination with naval power and his belief that Britain's strength lay in its fleet made this position a natural fit. Churchill threw himself into modernising the Royal Navy, championing the shift from coal to oil-powered ships and ensuring that Britain's naval superiority would remain unmatched. He foresaw the storm that was brewing across Europe and was determined that Britain would not be caught unprepared. But even as he built the foundations for Britain's defence, fate had other plans. Plans that would test Churchill's resolve like never before. When World War I erupted in 1914, Churchill's foresight and obsession with naval preparedness proved invaluable. He had long warned of the dangers posed by a resurgent Germany, and now the world was plunged into the very nightmare he had feared. As First Lord of the Admiralty, Churchill was instrumental in ensuring that Britain's navy was ready for the fight. He pushed for innovation, modernized tactics, and introduced new technologies that would give Britain an edge in the unforgiving theatre of war. But then came Gallipoli, the campaign that would haunt Churchill for the rest of his life. In 1915, desperate to break the deadlock on the Western Front, Churchill devised an audacious plan, an amphibious assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey. The goal was to open a new front, force Turkey out of the war, and provide relief to Russia. On paper, the plan was bold and brilliant. In execution, it was a catastrophe. The Gallipoli campaign descended into chaos and slaughter. Thousands of Allied soldiers, many of them young and inexperienced, were cut down in the unforgiving terrain. Churchill watched in horror as his carefully laid plans unraveled. The beaches of Gallipoli became a graveyard, and with each passing day, Churchill's reputation was buried deeper beneath the weight of failure. When the campaign ended in disaster, Churchill bore the brunt of the blame. His enemies seized the opportunity to discredit him, and the public, once captivated by his courage and charisma, now viewed him with suspicion and anger. Humiliated and heartbroken, Churchill resigned from his post, retreating into the shadows of political obscurity. But even as the world turned its back on him, Churchill's spirit remained unbroken. With his political career in ruins and his reputation tarnished, Churchill's future seemed uncertain. Yet, as history would soon reveal, this was not the end of Winston Churchill's story. It was merely the crucible that would forge him into the leader Britain would one day desperately need. The man who had faced political exile and personal humiliation would rise again, more determined, more resilient, and more prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. After the disastrous Gallipoli campaign, Winston Churchill's political career lay in ruins. His once glowing reputation had been tarnished, and the corridors of power that had once welcomed him now seemed cold and distant. In 1915, Churchill was forced to resign as First Lord of the Admiralty. And though he took a minor post as the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, it was a hollow consolation for a man who had tasted the heights of influence. Churchill's fall from grace was not just a political setback, it was a deeply personal blow. The man who had been hailed as a hero and a reformer was now branded reckless and irresponsible. "I am finished," he confided to his wife, Clementine, his voice heavy with despair. But for Churchill, defeat was never the end of the story. Even as the world turned its back on him, he refused to be silenced. In 1916, seeking solace and redemption, Churchill returned to his first love, the battlefield. He took command of a battalion on the Western Front in France, immersing himself in the mud, blood, and chaos of the trenches. The experience was both humbling and transformative. Churchill witnessed firsthand the horrors of war, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men who bore its greatest burdens. This period, though far from the political stage, reignited Churchill's sense of duty and deepened his understanding of sacrifice, an understanding that would shape the leader he was destined to become. But even as Churchill's soul was tempered on the battlefield, his political exile extended beyond the war. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, he found himself increasingly at odds with the political establishment. His criticism of Indian self-government made him a pariah among liberals who viewed him as an imperialist relic. Churchill's fiery opposition to granting India greater autonomy was rooted in his belief that Britain's empire was essential to maintaining global stability, but his views were seen as outdated and out of touch with the changing political climate. Yet it was Churchill's warnings about Adolf Hitler and the rise of Nazi Germany that would mark him as a voice in the wilderness. Throughout the 1930s, as Britain and much of Europe clung desperately to a policy of appeasement, Churchill's voice grew louder and more desperate. He saw the storm gathering long before others did. Speech after speech, Churchill sounded the alarm, warning of the looming threat posed by Nazi expansionism. "We are asleep while the world is on fire," he thundered in Parliament, his words echoing in chambers that had grown deaf to his pleas. But the British government, weary of war and desperate for peace, turned a blind eye. Churchill's relentless warnings were dismissed as fear-mongering, and his insistence on rearming Britain was seen as an unnecessary provocation. Isolated and derided, Churchill's voice grew hoarse with frustration, yet he refused to be silent. Fate, however, had not finished with Winston Churchill. As the 1930s drew to a close, the world's refusal to heed his warnings would prove catastrophic. Hitler's march across Europe shattered the fragile illusion of peace, and Britain, once complacent, now stood on the precipice of annihilation. In 1939, with the Nazi war machine devouring Poland and plunging Europe into darkness, Britain could no longer ignore the man who had foreseen the storm.
Check. Check one. Check. Check.
As war erupted, Neville Chamberlain, Britain's Prime Minister and architect of appeasement, had no choice but to recall the one man who had been preparing for this moment for years. In a dramatic turn of events, Churchill was reappointed First Lord of the Admiralty, the very position from which he had been forced to resign nearly 25 years earlier. When the news reached the Royal Navy, a simple but powerful message echoed through the fleet: Winston is back. But Churchill's return was not merely symbolic. He was no longer the brash, impulsive politician of his youth. This Churchill was tempered by failure, loss, and years in the wilderness. He returned with a renewed sense of purpose, his mind sharpened by reflection and his heart steeled for the fight that lay ahead. While many still clung to the hope of peace, Churchill was an outspoken critic of appeasement, relentlessly condemning Chamberlain's policies that had allowed Hitler to grow unchecked. His scathing critiques of the Munich Agreement of 1938, where Chamberlain had infamously declared peace for our time, were prophetic and hauntingly accurate. Churchill knew that Hitler's hunger for power could not be satisfied by diplomacy, only by resistance. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Churchill's grim prophecy had come to pass. Britain was at war once again, and this time the nation could no longer afford to ignore Churchill's voice. As the bombs fell and the spectre of invasion loomed, Churchill's unwavering resolve and fierce determination resonated with a nation in desperate need of hope. His return to prominence was not merely a political resurgence, it was a moment of destiny. The man who had been cast aside, mocked and dismissed, was now the only one who seemed prepared to lead Britain through its darkest hour. As war engulfed Europe and the shadow of tyranny spread across the continent, Winston Churchill stood ready to face the challenge that would define his life and the fate of the free world. But the greatest test was yet to come. As the tide of war rose and Britain stood alone against the Nazi juggernaut, the weight of an entire nation's survival would rest upon Churchill's shoulders. And this time he was ready. The spring of 1940 was a time of chaos and fear. Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg had torn through Europe with terrifying speed, leaving Britain dangerously isolated. As France crumbled under Hitler's relentless assault, Britain stood alone, staring into the abyss. Neville Chamberlain, whose policy of appeasement had failed to contain Hitler, had lost the confidence of Parliament and the British people. His resignation on May 10, 1940, marked a pivotal moment in history, but who could take his place? Who had the strength, the vision and the iron will to lead Britain through its darkest hour? The answer was a man who had spent a decade in political exile, a man whose warnings had been ignored until it was almost too late: Winston Churchill. On that fateful day, King George VI summoned Churchill to Buckingham Palace and asked him to form a government. Churchill's heart was heavy as he accepted the burden. "I felt as if I were walking with destiny," he later wrote, "and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and this trial." But Churchill did not step into power with unchallenged authority. His leadership was met with skepticism by many in Parliament, even within his own party. Yet, with Germany at Britain's doorstep, there was no time for doubt. Churchill swiftly formed a wartime coalition government, bringing together leaders from all political factions. This unity was not just political, it was essential for the survival of the nation. In Britain's darkest moments, when defeat seemed inevitable, Churchill's words became a lifeline that kept the nation's spirit alive. His speeches were not mere rhetoric. They were calls to arms laced with defiance and raw emotion, stirring the hearts of millions. On June 4, 1940, after the miraculous evacuation of Dunkirk, where over 300,000 British and Allied soldiers escaped annihilation, Churchill delivered one of his most famous speeches, "We shall fight on the beaches." His voice, resolute and unwavering, echoed through the chambers of Parliament and across the nation. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. But Churchill was not done. On June 18, 1940, as the spectre of Nazi invasion loomed over Britain, Churchill delivered another electrifying address, their finest hour. Speaking to a nation on the brink, he acknowledged the dangers ahead but refused to offer false hope. Instead, he summoned the courage of his people. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. These words echoed across bombed-out streets and into the hearts of ordinary Britons. Each speech was a lifeline, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, there was always a flicker of hope. And perhaps Churchill's most famous words came in his first speech as Prime Minister on May 13, 1940, when he told Parliament and the nation, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat." With these words, Churchill stripped away all illusions. Victory would not come easily. It would demand sacrifice, resilience, and unyielding courage. But Churchill's unshakable belief in ultimate victory inspired a nation to persevere. Churchill's strength was not just in his words, it was in his resolve to make hard, often unpopular decisions to secure victory. His unwavering refusal to negotiate with Hitler, even when Britain stood alone, was a testament to his iron will. In the summer of 1940, as the Luftwaffe rained terror from the skies during the Battle of Britain, Churchill faced pressure from some quarters to seek a negotiated peace. Britain's military resources were stretched thin, and the prospect of invasion seemed imminent. But Churchill's response was clear and uncompromising. You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. To Churchill, any negotiation with Hitler would be a betrayal, not just of Britain, but of freedom itself. He understood that appeasement had led to disaster, and he would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Churchill also recognized that Britain could not win the war alone. His diplomatic skill in forging and maintaining the Grand Alliance with Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin was a masterstroke of statesmanship. Though their ideologies were vastly different, Churchill's ability to build trust and maintain unity among the Allies was crucial. His correspondence with Roosevelt in particular laid the groundwork for America's entry into the war, a turning point that would tip the scales against Nazi Germany. Churchill's relationship with Stalin was more complex. Suspicion and ideological differences loomed large, but Churchill understood that without the Soviet Union's massive manpower, victory against Hitler was impossible. He swallowed his distaste for Stalin's brutal regime and focused on the greater goal, defeating Nazi Germany. As Hitler prepared to invade Britain, the fate of the nation rested on the shoulders of the few, the Royal Air Force pilots who stood between Britain and Nazi domination. Churchill's leadership during the Battle of Britain was marked by relentless determination and unwavering support for the RAF. Night after night, as the Luftwaffe bombed London and other cities, Churchill stood among the ruins, walking through the debris, comforting survivors, and vowing that Britain would endure. His admiration for the RAF was immortalized in his tribute. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The RAF's victory in the skies of Britain was a turning point. It was the first time Hitler had been stopped, and it proved that Britain would not fall. Churchill's strategic brilliance was also evident in the planning and execution of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. D-Day was the largest amphibious assault in history, a daring and complex operation that required meticulous planning and flawless coordination. Churchill had long advocated for a cross-channel invasion to liberate Western Europe, and when the time came, he ensured that every detail was accounted for. Though he was eager to witness the invasion firsthand, he was dissuaded from doing so by King George VI, who told him, "You have the whole world on your shoulders. You cannot afford to take the same risks as the men landing on those beaches." As the first waves of Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, Churchill knew that the fate of Europe rested on their success. Hours of anxious waiting turned into days of cautious optimism as the Allies established a foothold in France. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, and Churchill's vision and leadership had helped make it possible. Churchill's leadership during World War II was a symphony of courage, strategy, and resilience. Long before Churchill became a wartime icon, his pen wielded a power nearly as formidable as his speeches. An accomplished writer and historian, Churchill's literary gifts allowed him to capture the human drama of history in vivid detail. He poured his soul into countless essays, memoirs, and books, works that bridged the gap between art and history. His writings not only chronicled the tumult of his times, but also revealed the inner workings of a man perpetually caught between brilliance and vulnerability. In a stunning testament to his skill with words, Churchill was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. This honor was more than just recognition of his literary achievements. It was an affirmation of his ability to capture the complexity of human struggle and triumph. Even in the midst of war, his writings provided solace, insight, and an enduring legacy that continues to inspire readers around the world. Each page of his work is a reminder that beneath the rugged exterior of a wartime leader lay the heart of a poet and historian, forever exploring the depths of human experience. Away from the political battlefield, another side of Churchill emerged, a side painted in broad, bold strokes of colour. When the pressure of leadership became overwhelming, Churchill found refuge in the world of art. He took up painting as a hobby, a practice that allowed him to express emotions that words could scarcely capture. Brush in hand, he transformed blank canvases into vivid landscapes and portraits that were as tumultuous and expressive as the wars he waged. Over his lifetime, Churchill produced over 500 paintings, each one a window into his inner life, a blend of escapism, reflection, and raw emotion. These works are not mere pastimes. They are a testament to a man who, despite the burden of history on his shoulders, never ceased to seek beauty and peace in creativity. The colorful canvases remind us that even the most formidable leaders have a tender, artistic soul yearning for moments of tranquility amid chaos. Churchill's personal life was as colorful as his art and as profound as his literature. Known for his deep affection for animals, he often found solace in the company of his beloved poodles and cats. These loyal companions were more than pets. They were confidants and symbols of the softer, more human side of a man otherwise enmeshed in the relentless demands of leadership. His daily routines were a study in delightful eccentricity. Imagine a leader who, even in the throes of global conflict, was known to work from the comfort of his bed, a quirk that epitomized his unconventional approach to life. His odd habits and idiosyncrasies added layers to his personality. They revealed a man who cherished small pleasures, who found comfort in the familiar and who never lost sight of the simple joys amidst the chaos of war. The war had been won, but Churchill's greatest personal battle was yet to come. After leading Britain through its darkest hours and emerging victorious in 1945, Churchill was at the height of his popularity. His image had been cemented as the saviour of the nation, the man whose resolve and oratory had carried Britain through the ravages of war. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, Churchill faced a shocking defeat in the general election of July 1945. Despite his heroic wartime leadership, Churchill's Conservative Party was decisively ousted by the Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee, who promised sweeping social reforms and a new vision for post-war Britain. The British public, weary from years of sacrifice and eager for change, turned their backs on the wartime hero in favour of promises of a welfare state and economic reform. Churchill's campaign, focused on maintaining stability and resisting socialism, seemed out of touch with the people's desire for transformation. Yet Churchill was not a man to remain in the shadows for long. In a remarkable comeback, he returned as Prime Minister in 1951, proving once again that his resilience was as formidable as his rhetoric. Though his second term lacked the drama of his wartime leadership, Churchill remained a stabilizing force during a time of global uncertainty, as the Cold War loomed over Europe. As the twilight of his life approached, Churchill reluctantly accepted that even the greatest leaders must eventually step aside. In 1955, after serving 4 years during his second term as Prime Minister, Churchill retired from politics at the age of 80. His departure marked the end of an era, but his influence lingered, etched into the fabric of British politics and global diplomacy. Though he was no longer at the helm, Churchill's mind remained sharp and his spirit restless. He continued writing, reflecting on his experiences and chronicling the history he had helped shape. Winston Churchill was not just a political giant, he was also a devoted family man. He married Clementine Hosier in 1908 and together they had 5 children. Despite his demanding career, Churchill always made time for his family, often writing affectionate letters to his wife and children. His hobbies included painting and bricklaying, which he found to be great sources of relaxation and creativity. Churchill's personal life was a testament to his ability to balance the pressures of leadership with the joys of family and personal interests. After the Second World War, Churchill's life entered a new chapter. He lost the prime ministership in 1945, but remained an influential figure in British politics. In 1951, he returned to power for a second term as Prime Minister. During these years, Churchill focused on international diplomacy and the preservation of peace. He received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953 for his historical writings. Even after retiring from politics in 1955, Churchill continued to be a revered statesman until his death in 1965. In the aftermath of the Second World War, Winston Churchill faced an unexpected defeat. Despite his leadership during the war, the British public voted him out of office in the general election of 1945. The Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee, won a landslide victory, signalling a desire for change and a focus on domestic issues. The Labour Party's victory in 1945 marked a significant shift in British politics. Under Attlee's leadership, the government embarked on an ambitious programme of social reform. This included the creation of service and the nationalisation of key industries. For Churchill, it was a bitter pill to swallow, but he remained a prominent figure in British politics. Churchill's political career was far from over. In 1951, he made a remarkable comeback, returning to power as Prime Minister. His second term was marked by efforts to maintain Britain's global influence and navigate the challenges of the early Cold War period. Churchill's resilience and determination once again came to the forefront, proving his enduring significance in British history. Winston Churchill's legacy is one of profound impact and lasting influence. He is remembered as a wartime leader who inspired a nation, a statesman who navigated complex international landscapes, and a writer whose words continue to resonate. His contributions to history, politics, and literature ensure that his name remains synonymous with leadership and courage.